the secret fuel of the perfect housewife. How 1950s suburbia ran on amphetamines. Good evening, everyone. Tonight we're dusting off the record player, pulling on a crinoline skirt, and stepping into a world of gleaming linoleum, starched aprons, and smiles that never seem to crack. This is the era of the post-war American housewife, the woman who could scrub a bathtub, bake a four-tier cake, referee a toddler feud, and still greet her husband at the door looking like she just stepped off a magazine cover. It's a picture of effortless perfection, except it wasn't effortless at all. It was chemical. Tonight we're talking about the open secret of mid-century domestic life, the pharmaceutical stimulants, amphetamines, prescribed freely and cheerfully by family doctors, that quietly powered an entire generation of American mothers through an impossible workload. Before we get into it, if history told with a little bit of dark comedy is your thing, go ahead and hit subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where in the world you're tuning in from tonight. Now turn down the lights, put the kettle on, and let's get into it. Have you ever stopped to wonder how a woman with no dishwasher, no automatic dryer half the time, 3 kids underfoot, and a husband who considered helping out a foreign concept, managed to keep an entire household running like a Swiss watch? Have you wondered why doctors in the 1950s handed out stimulant prescriptions the way today's dentists hand out toothbrushes? Did you know that nerves was practically a diagnosis of its own, treatable with a pill that also happened to curb your appetite and keep you moving for 16 hours straight? Was the tidy, cheerful housewife of the post-war dream actually running on something closer to rocket fuel than resolve? Welcome to 1955. Your girdle is on, your roast is in the oven, and you have already broken a sweat before most of the neighborhood has finished its coffee. Let's begin. Part 1. The alarm clock that never really stops ringing. Picture the scene. It's a Tuesday, 5:30 in the morning, in a brand new subdivision somewhere between the highway and the cornfields. The wallpaper is the color of a candy shop, cherry blossoms and songbirds repeating in an endless pattern that somehow manages to be both cheerful and faintly hypnotic. Down the hall, a radio murmurs through a mix of big band tunes and Cold War anxieties, interrupted every few minutes by a cheerful jingle for a laundry detergent that promises to cut your work in half. A promise that, like most promises of the era, turns out to be wildly optimistic. She's awake before the sun properly clears the rooftops, not because she wants to be. Sleeping in belongs to movie stars, bachelors, and possibly Soviet spies, not to a woman with a household to run. Taped to the icebox is a list that would make a battlefield general blink. Eggs, lunches, laundry, the good silver needs polishing, a phone call to the church about Thursday's fundraiser, and somewhere in there, an actual conversation with her husband before he vanishes behind the sports section for the morning. And here is where the ritual truly begins. Tucked into the back of the medicine cabinet behind the cold cream and the cough syrup sits a small brown bottle. Her physician, a kindly, slightly distracted man who has never once asked why she looks tired, only prescribed something to fix it, has assured her this is simply a little pick-me-up. The label doesn't say amphetamine. It says something friendlier: pep tablets, energy capsules. A vitamin supplement with, shall we say, unusually vigorous side effects. She swallows one down with a glass of orange juice, fresh squeezed, because in this neighborhood frozen concentrate is what people buy when they've given up. And then something shifts. Her shoulders drop the tiredness. Her thoughts snap into crisp, orderly columns. The morning, which moments ago felt like an unclimbable mountain, now looks entirely conquerable, in fact, faintly thrilling. By the time her children stumble into the kitchen, hair every direction but the right one, she is 3 steps ahead of them. Breakfast half-plated, lunches half-packed, and the dog already walked and combed within an inch of his life. Down the street, in nearly identical kitchens behind nearly identical wallpaper, other women are doing precisely the same thing, each convinced she alone is the one barely holding it together. Her husband appears, tie half-knotted, expecting eggs that are somehow both perfectly fried and perfectly scrambled. Don't ask how. It's simply expected, along with hot coffee, a crisp newspaper, and a wife who looks as though she rolled out of bed already dressed for a garden party. He remarks, entirely without malice, that she seems awfully lively this early. She smiles. She does not mention the pharmacy bottle. There isn't really a polite way to bring it up over eggs. Outside, the world stretches and yawns into a new day. She, meanwhile, is already 3 chores ahead of it. There is no such thing as a coffee break. Not really. Just the 90 seconds locked in the bathroom pretending to fix her lipstick while actually just breathing. But by 8:30 in the morning, the kitchen is spotless. The children are fed, and somehow there are still 14 hours left to survive. Part 2. Breakfast as performance art. Let's rewind slightly and take a longer look at breakfast itself, because in the mid-century household, breakfast isn't simply a meal. It's opening night. She's still in her robe, curlers pinned in from the night before, moving across the kitchen linoleum with the brisk determination of someone late for a train that only she can hear. The counter holds the full inventory of the post-war breakfast table: eggs, bacon, white bread destined for the toaster, a tin of margarine dressed up to look like butter, canned grapefruit swimming in syrup, and quietly, almost apologetically, at the back of the cupboard, the family-size bottle from Dr. Whitfield's office, complete with his very generous refill policy. The coffee percolates. The table gets its second setting of the week, complete with the good napkins she embroidered one long, restless winter evening. Somewhere behind her, the children argue about whose cereal box has the better cartoon mascot printed on the front. She reaches for the little white tablet, swallows it with a mouthful of lukewarm instant coffee, and steels herself for what's coming. And what's coming, frankly, is a small miracle of choreography. Pancakes flip themselves, or so it seems. Eggs land on plates in perfect symmetry. Bacon curls exactly the way the magazines say it should. Toast leaps from the toaster at precisely the right moment. And for one glowing instant, she is not simply cooking breakfast. She is conducting it, like a one-woman orchestra with a spatula for a baton. Her husband arrives, reads the sports section aloud as though she's never once encountered the concept of baseball, and asks for something hearty. The children appear, hair uncombed, immediately locked in a competitive eating contest over who can finish the most flapjacks. She keeps the mood light, makes a joke about rocket fuel, and privately notes that she is roughly 3 pancakes from some sort of quiet, dignified collapse. This is the strange gift and curse of the little white tablet. It doesn't simply wake her up. It turns an ordinary breakfast into something closer to competitive multitasking at Olympic level. While flipping eggs, she is simultaneously drafting the week's grocery list in her head, counting laundry loads, and rehearsing an explanation for why the school fundraiser envelope is still unsigned on the hallway table. It's electric. It's slightly jittery. It leaves her with the distinct, faintly alarming sense that she could organize the entire linen closet, or, in a pinch, help launch a satellite. Her husband thanks her for the meal, kisses her cheek, and heads out the door with a briefcase full of paperwork and notably zero equivalent burden of domestic dread. The children grab their lunch pails, and she stands alone in a kitchen full of crumbs and quiet triumph, heart still racing, mind still buzzing, fed, dressed, and just the smallest bit unnerved by exactly how much energy is currently coursing through her. Part 3. The Religion of the Spotless House. If there's one commandment written into the unofficial gospel of 1950s suburbia, it's this: perfection is not optional. It's not even really a goal. It's closer to a moral obligation, enforced not by law but by the twitching curtains of every neighbor on the block. The magazines, glossy, cheerful, utterly relentless, insist that a woman ought to be slim, composed, and witty before her first cup of coffee has even cooled. Her kitchen floor should gleam. Her children should sparkle, metaphorically, and ideally, literally. Her marriage should appear effortless even on the evenings when her husband spends 3 hours fiddling with his shortwave radio and speaking to strangers in Ohio instead of to her. The pressure begins before her feet even touch the floor. Lying in bed at dawn, she is already mapping the day down to the minute: vacuum by 7:15, phone the school by 8:05, lipstick applied by 7:30, just in case the milkman happens to glance through the kitchen window. There is no margin for error here. A stray thread of dust under the sofa isn't simply untidy, it's a small moral failing, a crack in the whole performance. And she isn't only competing with some abstract standard of perfection. She's competing with a leaner 2 doors down, whose trash can somehow match her porch furniture, and with Dorothy across the street, whose mailbox gleams like a small piece of aviation equipment. Every child on the block is, apparently, either a scholarship student, a scout troop leader, or a piano prodigy, and every one of their mothers seems to be coaching this effortless brilliance without visibly breaking a sweat. Just when she believes she's caught up, the goalposts move again. 1 month, the magazines demand hand-crocheted doilies and homemade pie. The next, it's a complete living room overhaul in the latest Scandinavian style, alongside a casserole featuring no fewer than 6 kinds of cheese. She is meant to redecorate, reinvent, and lose 3 pounds, all before her husband gets home, and fails to notice that the new lamp is simply last year's lamp with a fresh ribbon tied around it. And here's the cruel twist: perfection isn't just expected, it's expected to look effortless. Appear too frazzled and the neighborhood will talk. Appear too relaxed and they'll talk even more, usually phrased as a compliment with teeth. "I just don't know how you manage it all, dear," delivered with the warmth of someone quietly grading her on a scale she never agreed to. Behind closed doors, she runs a constant private audit. Is her apron too creased? Is her son's cowlick too wild for company? Will the ladies from the missionary circle notice the chip in the good teacup? Or worse, the faint whiff of existential dread underneath the pot roast? At any moment, someone might drop by unannounced, a genuine terror that sends her scrambling to straighten magazines and smooth sofa cushions with the urgency of a woman defusing a bomb. And then, of course, there is her mother-in-law, purse clutched like evidence, eyes sweeping the baseboards for any hint of neglect. She doesn't need to say a single critical word. Her silence does the job perfectly well. A slice of cake is offered up like tribute. Approval is not really the goal anymore, survival is. Still, she carries on because the unwritten law of the suburbs insists that if perfection itself is unreachable, the appearance of trying is the bare minimum. She smooths her skirt, takes a breath, and reminds herself that the domestic Olympics never truly end. She has simply learned, with a little chemical assistance, how to keep running the race. Part 4. Scrubbing like an Olympic sport. By 8 in the morning, she is already, by the unspoken rules of the neighborhood, running behind schedule. The children have barely made it out the door. Her husband is halfway to his office downtown, and she is standing in the living room studying a coffee table with the narrowed focus of a woman preparing for battle. Is that mark on the table a fingerprint, or a genuine threat to civilization as she knows it? Either way, it has to go. The radio clicks on something upbeat, something with a swinging horn section, because she once read that music improves productivity, though truthfully, the little white tablet from breakfast is doing most of the actual heavy lifting today. She hauls the vacuum cleaner from the closet, heavy as a small anvil, hailed in every advertisement as the pinnacle of modern convenience, and gets to work with something approaching military precision. No dust bunny stands a chance. She hits every corner, every skirting board, and when the cord inevitably wraps itself around her ankle mid-stride, she doesn't so much as pause. She is a woman on a mission, and the vacuum cleaner, frankly, does not stand a chance against her today. From vacuum to mop to duster, there's a rhythm to it now, almost a private little dance. The kitchen floor shines. The sink gleams. The countertop catches the morning light like something out of a home appliance catalog, and each little reflection feels like a small personal victory. She scrubs the bathtub with enough vigor to intimidate a professional wrestler, reorganizes the medicine cabinet, and pauses only to wonder, not for the first time, why toothpaste tubes refuse to stay properly rolled. Cleaning here isn't merely about tidiness, it's about self-worth. The house is a direct reflection of her marriage, her upbringing, her standing on the street. A smear on the window isn't just a smear, it's practically a character reference. A streak on the good silver is practically a confession. She polishes and scrubs because deep down she knows the neighborhood's rumor mill runs on precisely this kind of evidence. A ring in the bathtub, a faint dusting of pollen left too long on a windowsill. Occasionally her brain, thoroughly charged by now, invents entirely new chores just to keep the momentum going. Why not reorganize the linen closet by color? Why not empty the refrigerator entirely, if only for the satisfaction of tossing out one wilted head of lettuce and 3 unidentifiable jars of preserves? There isn't time to question the logic. On the pep pill, even the dullest task feels urgent, almost thrilling. She finds herself on her hands and knees scrubbing bathroom grout with a toothbrush, as though the honor of the entire household hinges on the whiteness of the tile. The telephone rings. She answers with a breezy good morning, all while privately calculating how many minutes remain before the baseboards absolutely must be dusted. The work never really ends, not fully, but for one shining moment, she stands in the middle of her spotless living room and lets herself feel a small flicker of pride. The house sparkles. The air smells faintly of lemon polish. Her heart is racing like a parade drum, and for now at least, she is the undisputed champion of the morning shift. Part 5, the home party hustle. The phone rings again. This time it's Dorothy, breathless with excitement, inviting her to just a little get-together, nothing fancy. Of course, this is never simply coffee and conversation. This is the front line of suburban commerce, the home sales party, a phenomenon sweeping the country with the intensity of a minor religious revival, built entirely on molded plastic storage containers, cosmetics, or the occasional overpriced set of encyclopedias. Preparation begins days in advance. The house is scrubbed as though awaiting royal inspection. Hours are spent debating which dress strikes the right note between festive and approachable. There's a quiet, mounting competition, whose deviled eggs will hold their shape, whose gelatin mold will actually set properly, whose cocktail napkins are the most aggressively starched. By the time Dorothy arrives, trailing an arsenal of nesting bowls and pastel-colored tumblers, she herself is already running a touch hot, thanks in no small part to the little tablet tucked discreetly into her purse. The other women file in, each one silently appraising the living room as though it might be featured next month in a home decorating magazine. Dorothy launches into her sales pitch with the polish of a television announcer, snapping a lid onto a plastic container with a triumphant little pop. The room oozes collectively, as though she's just announced a cure for the common cold. There's real pressure in the air, an unspoken suburban arms race. If Dorothy is hosting today, everyone knows Margaret and Louise will be hosting next, and nobody wants to be the woman who showed up empty-handed and left with an empty shopping list. By the time the order forms come out, she signs her name with a faintly trembling hand, resolving privately to host the next party herself, if only to pass this particular burden along to somebody else. That, in the end, is the real secret at the heart of these gatherings. It was never really about the merchandise. It's about the endless, self-perpetuating cycle, one party inevitably feeding the next, until every kitchen cupboard on the block is stuffed nearly to bursting with identical plastic tumblers nobody quite remembers buying. Part 6, what the neighbors already know. Step outside for a moment, and the whole street hums with a particular kind of electricity, not just the scent of fresh-cut grass, but the low, constant murmur of gossip traveling between clotheslines. In this neighborhood, word travels faster than almost anything, except perhaps a housewife who's doubled her morning dose and just remembered the iron is still plugged in. The parade begins early. Eleanor is already out hosing down her driveway for the second time before 9 in the morning, insisting she's simply a naturally energetic person. Everyone quietly suspects otherwise. Down the block, Margaret jogs past in full makeup, purse swinging like a pendulum, pausing only to chat with the postman for the third time this week. Nobody, truthfully, is fooling anybody. Everyone is exhausted. Everyone is a little wound up. And every single household seems to have a friendly family doctor more than willing to write a prescription to smooth things along. It's an open secret, hiding in plain sight behind streak-free windows and alphabetized pantry shelves. At the school fundraising committee meeting, the conversation moves briskly along, occasionally veering off into passionate debate about laundry detergents or vacuum attachments, while somewhere in the back row, two women trade notes in hushed tones about which physician prescribes the stronger dosage, and which one to avoid mentioning the night sweats to. Of course, the gossip isn't only about pills. It covers everything: whose children run wild, whose mortgage is behind, who tried to pass off a store-bought pie as homemade at the last church social. But increasingly, it circles back to one particular topic: energy. Who has it? Who's faking it? Who's barely holding herself together behind a pair of oversized sunglasses? Even the pharmacy counter becomes its own quiet social institution, women standing in line, feigning interest in greeting cards while sneaking glances at each other's paper bags. The pharmacist naturally knows everyone's business, dispensing both medication and small talk with equal discretion. "How's the garden coming along, Mrs. Reynolds? Up late again weeding?" "Oh, yes, can't seem to slow down these days." Both of them know precisely why. And the gossip never really rests. It travels down long spiral telephone cords stretched to their absolute limit, whispered in confidence between neighbors comparing notes, trading small comforts, engaging in gentle one-upmanship. Underneath the manic energy and pastel smiles, though, runs a quieter, darker current, the silent dread of falling behind, of being the one woman on the block who simply can't keep pace. Still, the parade continues. Everyone smiles, everyone waves. And everyone, in their own quiet way, keeps moving, one small prescription at a time. Part 7. A visit to the family doctor. Let's step inside the doctor's office for a moment, because this particular ritual deserves its own careful examination. It is, in its own way, just as choreographed as vacuuming the living room or setting the good table. She arrives clutching her purse and her nerves in roughly equal measure, greeted by a receptionist in a crisp uniform who hands over a clipboard along with a sympathetic, knowing smile. The waiting room smells faintly of rubbing alcohol and hairspray, decorated with magazines promising slimmer thighs within the week. Every woman seated here wears more or less the same expression, polite, wide-eyed, and quietly calculating exactly how much housework isn't currently getting done during this brief escape. The nurse calls her name. She steps onto the scale, pretending not to care about the number, though she cares a great deal. Blood pressure, temperature, pulse, a litany of small indignities follow. Asked about her sleep, her appetite, her general mood, she answers in the polite, understated language of the era. Just a little tired lately is all. Nothing serious, really. What she actually means is that she hasn't properly sat down in months, and reorganized the pantry alphabetically at 2 in the morning purely out of nervous compulsion. Then comes the main event, the doctor himself, white coat pressed, tie perfectly knotted, hair combed in the universal style of a man who has never once ironed his own shirt. He glances briefly at her chart, nods along as she explains she's simply worn thin, anxious, a touch short-tempered with the children, unable to keep pace with the demands of modern living. He doesn't ask about her marriage. He doesn't ask what she wants out of life, or whether she ever gets a moment entirely to herself. Instead, he offers a warm, well-rehearsed reassurance. Perfectly understandable, Mrs. Carlton. Women today carry an enormous amount of pressure. It's a wonder any of you are still standing. Fortunately, medicine has made some wonderful advances. He says the word medicine, the way a magician might say abracadabra, as though it alone will dissolve every ounce of doubt. Out comes the prescription pad, dependable as sunrise. A few quick strokes of the pen, and she leaves the office as the proud new owner of a month's supply of Mother's Little Helper, often paired with a mild sedative for the evenings, just in case. Nobody mentions dependency. Nobody mentions side effects. Just a cheerful assurance that this will pick her right up and, as a delightful bonus, perhaps help her drop a few stubborn pounds along the way. The whole exchange takes less time than a trip to the bakery and is roughly as personal. On her way out, the pharmacist fills the order with the same practiced discretion of a man hearing confession. The little paper bag is labeled, vaguely and unhelpfully, "Take as needed." As needed by whom, exactly, is anyone's guess. Sitting in the car afterward, prescription in hand, she feels an odd mixture of relief and quiet resignation. She knows, without needing to ask, that every woman in her book club carries something similar tucked into the bottom of her handbag. Nobody discusses it out loud, but everyone in their own way is in on the same unspoken arrangement. Part 8. 10 in the morning and already a full day behind. It's not yet 10:30, and already she's changed 2 diapers, baked half a cake, rearranged the throw pillows by color, and briefly questioned the very meaning of existence. Time, perhaps, for another little pick-me-up. The morning has been relentless. The children are dressed, too, in matching plaid, one in a homemade cowboy costume that refuses to come off, and the baby in something reasonably clean, if not entirely presentable. Breakfast has ended, or at least the edible portion has. The rest is currently smeared across the kitchen wall. She's wiped the counters twice, chased the family dog out of the rubbish bin once, and discovered a stray sock inside the oven for reasons nobody can explain. The house buzzes with noise. The baby is upset because her blanket feels funny. The 4-year-old is threatening the family goldfish with a toy cowboy figure. Someone, somehow, is already hungry again. Her husband is presumably at the office, having left that morning with the same look of freedom a dog wears when the backyard gate swings open. Meanwhile, she operates like a one-woman assembly line, folding laundry, prepping lunch, negotiating peace treaties between siblings, and settling an increasingly heated debate over whose turn it is to name the dust bunnies gathering beneath the sofa. On top of it all sits the cake, the centerpiece for this afternoon's entirely unplanned, yet somehow mandatory coffee gathering. In this neighborhood, every visit is an event, and every cake a small performance in itself. The frosting must sit just right. The sprinkles must be evenly distributed. The whole production must appear effortless, as though she simply woke up feeling inspired, rather than running on 4 hours of broken sleep and one quiet existential crisis before breakfast. Glancing at the clock, she can hardly believe it's not even lunchtime yet. It feels somehow as though an entire day has already come and gone. Precisely this moment calls for the day's second little helper. She slips into the bathroom, closes the door like a woman on a covert mission, and reaches into the medicine cabinet for the small bottle marked, unhelpfully, as needed. If pressed, she'll simply explain that needed is really just a polite synonym for 10:30 on a Tuesday. She swallows the tablet, splashes cool water on her face, and rehearses her everything is perfectly fine smile in the mirror one more time. The world, after all, expects grace, not exhaustion. She steps back out, freshly energized, ready to face the next wave of chaos. Somewhere in the back of her mind, a small, quiet voice asks, "Is this really it? Is this the whole of my life?" She doesn't have time to answer. There's a wrestling match currently underway over the last of the biscuits, and someone needs to referee it immediately. Part 9. The cult of the smaller waistline. Every magazine on the newsstand promises the same thing. Happiness comes wrapped in a smaller dress size. It isn't only social pressure, it's practically a national campaign. Physicians, fashion editors, and the woman 3 doors down all seem to agree, in perfect unison, that a lady really ought to watch her figure. As though she wasn't already watching every single bite, every calorie, every stray glance toward the dessert tray at church functions. And conveniently, there's a shortcut readily available at the pharmacy counter. Diet tablets, really nothing more than the same stimulants dressed up under friendlier names. Names like Slender Raid or Vim Tabs, or the vaguely scientific-sounding metabolic accelerator. Each morning, right after coffee and just before the second slice of toast, she takes her appetite suppressant. Its job, simply put, is to convince her brain that food is optional, hunger is a character flaw, and thinness sits somewhere just below godliness on the ladder of virtue. Suddenly she isn't hungry, not for breakfast, not for lunch, not even when the church social sets out an entire table groaning with homemade pastries. Instead, she's polishing silverware, reorganizing the pantry, and alphabetizing the spice rack, all fueled by a nervous, buzzing energy that feels equal parts accomplishment and quiet unraveling. She's hardly alone in this. Practically the entire street is secretly supplementing willpower with a bit of chemical reinforcement. Alina swears by the green tablets, insisting they speed up her metabolism, though mostly they seem to result in her repainting the garage door at midnight. Louise prefers the pink ones, less jittery, more cheerful, with the added benefit of making her forget lunchtime entirely. At the weekly bridge club, everyone sips Diet Cola and pretends the plate of celery sticks is exactly what they'd been craving all along. The magazines are, predictably, no help whatsoever. Each new issue offers a fresh miracle food, a new exercise regimen, and at least 3 competing diets with contradictory rules. Grapefruit for breakfast, cottage cheese for lunch, steak and black coffee for dinner. The only real constant across all of them is the quiet implication that if you're hungry, you're probably doing something wrong. Somewhere between the hunger pangs and the light-headed afternoons, she notices her dresses fitting a little looser. Her mother-in-law, ever vigilant, remarks approvingly on how slender she's looking these days. She smiles politely and mutters something vague about simply being busy, leaving out the part where her nervous system currently resembles that of an over-caffeinated squirrel. Of course, there's a cost. The appetite suppressants don't just quiet hunger, they quiet sleep, patience, and peace of mind right along with it. At night, she lies awake staring at the ceiling, genuinely uncertain whether she's finally achieved the right figure or simply hallucinated her way into a smaller dress size. Her stomach growls. She ignores it. The real hunger, if she's honest with herself, isn't for food at all, it's for one single day without guilt attached to every bite. Part 10. An aerobic approach to ironing. By now, she hasn't blinked in what feels like 40 minutes, and every shirt in the house is crisp enough to slice bread. Ironing in this household is less a chore than a full-contact sport, and she is, without contest, the reigning champion of the wrinkle-free collar. The ironing board goes up after breakfast. The iron fills with water. She surveys the day's challenge: 5 dress shirts, 3 pairs of trousers, 2 blouses, and a tablecloth with more creases than a relief map of the Rockies. The radio hums cheerfully in the background, sunlight slants through the window, and she is, thanks in no small part to the little tablet she took after finishing the kitchen, sharper than usual, focused, almost surgical in her precision. The iron glides. She presses, steams, and smooths with something approaching military discipline, lost entirely in the rhythm of fabric and heat. The scent of freshly pressed cotton mingles with sharp, clean starch. Each shirt transforms from a crumpled heap into a small badge of suburban pride. She moves the iron like a conductor's baton, orchestrating chaos into order, one crisp collar at a time. Time seems to vanish entirely. She hasn't glanced at the clock in what feels like ages, yet her hands keep moving, guided by some strange, buzzing sense of purpose. She irons sleeves with the delicate care of an artist, flattens collars until they could theoretically slice bread, and adds an extra sharp crease into her husband's trousers, purely to show off a little. Perfection, naturally, comes at a price. She's developed an almost supernatural eye for imperfection. A single stray wrinkle now registers as a personal affront. She re-irons shirts already perfectly pressed, simply to be entirely certain. The children have learned, wisely, to keep a healthy distance from the ironing board during these episodes. There's something almost meditative about the whole ritual, the gentle hiss of steam, the comforting weight of the iron, neat stacks of folded laundry mounting on the table. For this brief window of time, ironing feels like a genuine, tangible victory over the general chaos of life. Eventually, the adrenaline fades, and she surveys her handiwork: stacks of perfectly pressed shirts, gleaming pillowcases, an ironing board practically radiating triumph. Maybe tomorrow she'll finally tackle the curtains. Maybe, just for once, she'll sit down for 5 uninterrupted minutes and let herself believe, however briefly, that she has genuinely pressed the world into some kind of order. Part 11. Daytime television and the parade of cheerful strangers. Late morning arrives, and with it, a small, precious window of relative quiet. The laundry hangs drying. The children are occupied, one coloring, one napping, one negotiating loudly for extra biscuits. This, according to the magazines, is meant to be her time. In reality, it's simply her, the television set, and a cup of coffee that has somehow gone cold while remaining, inexplicably, too strong. She settles onto the sofa and switches on the television. A warm hum fills the room, followed by the familiar parade of daytime programming: Technicolor smiles, gentle piano scores, and the persistent suggestion that happiness is really just one household cleaning product away. First come the soap operas: tangled love triangles, secret identities, doctors who never appear to practice actual medicine. She watches, faintly amused, as a fictional heroine discovers her fiancé is secretly her long-lost cousin. It's delicious nonsense, but in a life where her own daily drama tends to revolve around a sticky kitchen floor and a missing sock, it's oddly comforting to escape into a world where amnesia, not burnt pot roast, is the biggest problem on the table. The commercials arrive fast and frequent, each one promising a small miracle in a bottle. Feeling run down, behind on your housework? A cheerful announcer asks, as a smiling actress scrubs an already spotless bathtub with more enthusiasm than anyone has genuinely ever felt about grout. She recognizes that particular gleam in the actress's eye. It's the same one she caught in her own bathroom mirror this morning, mid-pantry reorganization. Then come the talk programs. Hostesses with immaculate posture discussing everything from proper table settings to the latest diet craze sweeping the country. A guest explains, with unblinking enthusiasm, exactly how she managed to lose 15 pounds on a doctor-approved new plan, which, judging by her overall demeanor, likely involved considerably more than simply cutting out dessert. Through it all, the television functions as a kind of companion, a comforting, slightly manic friend offering a gentle, chemically tinted escape from the relentless list of chores still waiting in every other room of the house. Eventually, she switches it off, rises from the sofa, and heads back into the fray, one small commercial jingle still looping quietly in her head. Part 12. The pharmacy as town square. Just past noon, errands beckon: bread, milk, a tin of soup, and sitting quietly at the very top of the list, the daily pilgrimage to the neighborhood pharmacy. In theory, this is simply where one collects a prescription. In practice, the pharmacy functions as something closer to a second church, or perhaps a confessional booth with fluorescent lighting. The bell above the door jingles as she steps inside, greeted by a chorus of familiar voices. Mrs. Alvarez is already at the counter clutching a small paper bag of mysterious ointments. Behind her, Ruth is gossiping in hushed tones about the school board, glancing occasionally at the greeting card rack to make sure nobody's eavesdropping too closely. The pharmacist, Mr. Callahan, stands behind the counter in a spotless white coat, ready to dispense advice that never quite answers the question actually being asked. There's a rhythm to these visits, browsing shelves for vitamins she doesn't strictly need, a tin of mints for the children, a magazine featuring a smiling woman posed beside a garden salad. But the real reason for the visit sits in a small paper bag with her name written carefully across the front. The exchange is quiet, almost ceremonial. "Feeling any better?" Mr. Callahan asks, which is less a medical inquiry and more a coded pleasantry. The honest answer is complicated, but the tablets work, Or at the very least, they make her fast enough to keep pace with the house, the children, and her own relentless standards. The pharmacy, in its own strange way, becomes a hub of connection and quiet camaraderie, news, gossip, and unspoken solidarity, all dispensed alongside the medication. She overhears Ruth murmuring about a new prescription Louise has switched to, supposedly better for the appetite. She nods, pretending only mild interest, though of course, everyone already knows everyone else's business anyway. Secrets simply don't last long between the vitamins and the foot powder. Before leaving, she makes the rounds, swapping casserole recipes, comparing notes on the school play, discussing the alarmingly rising price of eggs. With her prescription tucked safely into her purse and her head buzzing with half a dozen unfinished conversations, she steps back out into the sunlight, ready to tackle the remainder of the day. Part 13. Balancing the books at amphetamine speed. Early afternoon brings a different kind of challenge, the household ledger. The kitchen table becomes, briefly, a war room. Checkbook, a stack of utility bills, a stubby pencil, and a notebook ruled into columns so precise even a tax auditor might nod in quiet approval. On the windowsill sits a neat row of labeled glass jars, groceries, milk, laundry, emergencies, and the ever-hopeful vacation fund, which she raided 2 weeks ago for milk money and has not yet found the heart to replenish. Guilt lingers faintly, alongside a small, persistent daydream of one day actually seeing the ocean, or at minimum, staying somewhere with room service. She feels the day's second tablet beginning to peak, and suddenly the numbers cooperate. Columns align themselves neatly. Addition becomes effortless. She can somehow recall, with startling clarity, the exact price of bread 3 months prior. She pays the gas bill, jots a note about rising egg prices, and cross-references the week's grocery list against a small pile of clipped coupons. Meanwhile, the household orchestra continues around her. She stirs a simmering pot of soup, separates 2 squabbling children with a single raised eyebrow, answers the telephone. "No, Ruth. I'm afraid I can't host bridge club this Thursday. The silverware's terribly busy." And jots a reminder to buy more postage stamps, all without once losing her place in the ledger. There's an undercurrent of quiet anxiety running beneath all this efficient bookkeeping, however. Every cent has somewhere specific it needs to go. She tallies the week's groceries, discovers she's $1 over budget, and immediately begins revising the dinner menu accordingly. Casserole Monday, meatloaf Tuesday, pancakes for dinner Wednesday again, with the resigned energy of a woman who understands that every raffle ticket sold at the school fundraiser is one less scoop of proper ice cream for her children this month. Still, there's a genuine, quiet pride in keeping it all balanced. She sharpens her pencil, adjusts her glasses, and double-checks the totals, just in case the tablets are making her a touch too optimistic about her own arithmetic. By the time the children burst through the back door covered in grass stains, she has reconciled the accounts, revised the meal plan, and closed the checkbook with a satisfied little snap, pulse pounding, head clear. Another small victory notched for suburban household mathematics. Part 14. The School Pickup Grand Prix. By 3 in the afternoon, she is idling behind the wheel of the family sedan, engine running, radio murmuring, eyes locked on the school's front doors like a hawk watching a field mouse. This is not casual waiting. This is the daily ritual known, unofficially among the neighborhood mothers, as the pickup line, a peculiar blend of patience and barely restrained competitive driving. There's an unspoken hierarchy here, built over years of silent rivalry. Louise always arrives absurdly early, staking her claim with a thermos of iced tea perched proudly on the dashboard, a clear signal she has no intention of yielding her spot to anyone. Margaret, by contrast, is perpetually late, sailing in with mere seconds to spare, windows down, radio blaring, her chaotic energy somehow both admirable and mildly infuriating. Her own mind, sharpened by the afternoon's pep tablet and a second cup of lukewarm coffee, is running at full speed, calculating alternate routes home, scanning for stray bicycles and wandering toddlers, keeping one careful eye on the rear-view mirror for the inevitable PTA volunteer clutching yet another fundraising form. Finally, the doors swing open and a wave of children spills out, waving construction paper artwork and half-eaten apples. She squints, hunting for her own children among a blur of identical plaid shirts and unruly cowlicks. Once located, the loading process becomes a small masterclass in efficiency. Doors open, children pile in, immediate requests fire off in rapid succession. Snacks, book fare money, and an urgent explanation for why every other mother apparently sends homemade cookies except her. She hands out crackers, mops up a spilled thermos of juice, and cranks the window down for air, all while her pulse continues tapping out its own private rhythm, courtesy of the pharmaceutical assistance she's carrying. Escape from the parking lot itself is its own small challenge, scanning for gaps in traffic, judging the speed of the station wagon idling behind her. Silently praying the man in the delivery truck doesn't attempt to cut through the lot again like he's auditioning for a demolition derby. Back home, unloading children, backpacks, and stray snack wrappers, her heart is still racing, her mind already several steps ahead toward homework, dinner, and whatever minor crisis awaits next. The pickup line is over. The real marathon, as always, continues. Part 15. Dinner, the nightly production. By 4:30, the witching hour has arrived, the moment every housewife in the neighborhood quietly dreads and privately takes some pride in conquering. She stands in the kitchen, surveying her raw materials: ground beef, a can of condensed soup, wilting celery, and enough potatoes to sculpt a modest-scale replica of a national monument. Dinner here is never simply dinner. It's tonight's test, a nightly grade on her performance as wife, mother, and aspiring home cook. Tonight's assignment: make it appear effortless, appetizing, and vaguely inspired by something glimpsed in a home magazine, even if the only detail she actually remembers about that magazine spread is that the featured kitchen had double ovens and presumably live-in help. She ties on a freshly starched apron and takes inventory. Meatloaf, reliable, filling, and with any luck moist enough not to require an emergency gravy rescue. A gelatin dessert chills in the icebox, suspended fruit slices glinting inside like tiny jewels. For vegetables, she selects a trio, because variety, apparently, is the very spice of suburban existence. Canned peas, boiled carrots, and cauliflower dressed in a cheerful cheese sauce designed largely to disguise its true nature. The performance begins in earnest. The radio plays something gentle. She chops, peels, and mixes at a pace only truly achievable with a bit of pharmaceutical assistance. The meatloaf goes into the oven. She checks the clock nervously again and again. Every detail matters tonight: potatoes fluffy, gelatin properly set, table arranged with near-mathematical symmetry, napkins folded into crisp triangles, silverware gleaming, water glasses free of a single fingerprint, because in this household, standards don't simply exist, they practically levitate. Meanwhile, she fields a constant stream of questions and small crises from every direction. The children, entering their pre-dinner starving phase, circle the kitchen like hungry sharks. She distracts them with carrot sticks and crackers. Her husband calls from the den, wondering what's for supper and whether she remembered his dry cleaning. She answers with a cheerful, almost ready "dear," while privately entertaining a brief fantasy of relocating to a remote cabin populated exclusively by squirrels. There are, inevitably, small culinary dramas along the way. The gravy threatens to curdle, the potatoes flirt dangerously with scorching, the gelatin refuses to be rushed. She perseveres, sweat forming but smile unwavering, dipping once more into the little drawer for just enough of a boost to finish plating with flair. On the tablet's effects, even arranging a sprig of parsley becomes something close to performance art. At 5:30 sharp, she calls everyone to the table. There's an unspoken ceremony to the whole ritual, her husband seated at the head, the children arranged by age, herself positioned near the stove with an encouraging glance and serving spoon at the ready. Conversation flows, occasionally even easily, and for one brief shining moment, it genuinely resembles the pictures in the magazines. But behind the scenes, she's still working, refilling glasses, mopping up spills, intercepting stray peas rolling toward the edge of the table. As dinner winds down, she surveys the aftermath: half-eaten vegetables, empty plates, a few stray globs of gelatin dessert. The applause is silent but understood nonetheless. Another meal, another quiet performance, another day survived beneath the bright, relentless spotlight of suburban domestic life. Part 16, The Homecoming. At 4:45, the air in the house grows thick with the scent of roasting meat, slightly scorched vegetables, and lemon-scented floor polish. There's a certain nervous electricity in the atmosphere, the kind felt just before a surprise inspection. The children have been tidied and wiped clean. The table gleams to near magazine standards. She does one final sweep through the living room, straightening cushions, fluffing curtains, and discreetly kicking a stray toy soldier beneath the sofa with the practiced ease of a woman who has done this exact maneuver hundreds of times before. She smooths her skirt, touches up her lipstick, and checks her reflection one last time for stray pins or telltale signs of exhaustion. This, she reminds herself, is the most crucial 5 minutes of the entire day. The breadwinner is due home any moment, and everything must appear absolutely perfect. This isn't merely dinner preparation, it's theater. Even the family dog seems to sense it, parking himself expectantly by the front door, tail already wagging in anticipation. She checks the clock. He's nearly home. Her heart thumps, part anticipation, part residual caffeine, part something else entirely. A car door slams outside. The breadwinner has arrived. She takes a steadying breath, straightens her posture, and opens the door with the practiced choreography of someone greeting an important guest. In he walks, briefcase in one hand, newspaper tucked beneath the other arm, tie slightly askew from a full day of what he considers real work. He smiles, thanks her for dinner, and deposits his belongings onto the very table she polished not 20 minutes earlier. The children rush him with excited greetings, and for a moment the room fills with noise, laughter, and competing stories about everyone's most important event of the day. This is the performance she's quietly rehearsed all afternoon. She herds everyone toward the table, serves the meatloaf with a small flourish, and pours ice water with the practiced grace of a seasoned hostess. Her husband remarks that dinner smells wonderful, and she beams, quietly filing the compliment away for the inevitable evening when he instead notices a slightly burnt edge or an empty salt shaker. Underneath the pleasant surface conversation runs a low, constant hum of anxiety. Does he seem happy tonight? Does he notice the new curtains? Will he ask about the garage door that still squeaks, or worse, comment that she looks a little tired? He doesn't know, of course, that tired is a feeling she hasn't genuinely experienced in months, buried somewhere beneath layer after layer of pharmaceutical assistance. She asks politely about his day, nods along at his stories, and marvels privately at the entirely foreign country that is his office. She is, in this single hour, simultaneously the gracious hostess, the attentive mother, and the endlessly pleasant spouse. Occasionally, a quieter thought surfaces. Does he actually appreciate all of this, or does he simply expect it as the natural order of things? Is this truly the summit of post-war happiness? A clean house, a hot meal, and everyone smiling on cue. There's no real time to dwell on it. Plates empty. Seconds get requested. Dessert waits patiently in the icebox. After dinner, her husband retreats to the den with his newspaper. The children scatter to their evening activities. The applause for tonight's performance is silent but entirely understood. She clears the plates, washes the dishes, and quietly begins preparing, mentally at least, for tomorrow's encore. Part 17. A calendar packed tighter than a girdle. Her weekly calendar is so densely packed it practically needs its own prescription. Volunteering, organizing, and pretending, quite convincingly, to be thrilled about hosting book club for the third time this month. In theory, She is a stay-at-home housewife with plenty of leisure time. In reality, her schedule rivals that of a small-town mayor, minus the security detail. Every week brings its own parade of obligations: school committee meetings, bake sales, fundraisers, book club gatherings, each one another opportunity to demonstrate that her life is not only running smoothly, but positively brimming with wholesome enthusiasm. The school committee is often the first battlefield of the week. She attends every meeting, notebook and pen at the ready, jotting down assignments like organize the raffle table or collect 40 pairs of donated mittens by Friday. There's invariably one mother, usually Louise, who volunteers for absolutely everything, and her sheer existence quietly pressures everyone else to keep pace. She signs her own name to the sheet, even as some small internal voice pleads for mercy, and her pantry silently wonders how many more batches of brownies it can realistically survive this season. Then come the bake sales, a kind of edible Olympics of maternal achievement. Every mother arrives with her strongest recipe, hopping for compliments and a little neighborhood glory. Last week, it was lemon squares. This week, she's considering a caramel layer cake, despite the fact that her last attempt at one ended up resembling something closer to a small archaeological excavation. Every table becomes a minefield of quiet comparison: whose treats sold out fastest, whose pie looked suspiciously store-bought, the ultimate social insult, and whose cookies ended up smudged with the committee chairwoman's lipstick. Book club, meant to be a relaxing escape, is somehow no less demanding. She hosts with the good china laid out and a spread of dainty sandwiches, while conversation inevitably drifts away from the evening's chosen novel, which, let's be honest, only half the group has actually finished, and into a polite yet ruthless audit of everyone's living room curtains and current magazine subscriptions. Nobody mentions medication directly, but everyone in the room seems just a touch too bright-eyed, a touch too eager to move briskly through the evening's agenda. Beyond the events themselves lies the constant, invisible competition simmering underneath every interaction. Louise's children have perfect attendance. Margaret's husband just received an award at the Rotary Club dinner. Dorothy redecorated her dining room again. Meanwhile, she's simply hoping nobody notices the chipped paint in her own front hallway. Opting out of any of this isn't really an option. Miss too many meetings and whispers start, or worse, genuine concern. Is everything all right at home? Someone will ask sweetly, which really translates to, why can't you keep pace with the rest of us? So the calendar stays full, the good silverware stays polished, and her hair stays neat as her reputation, fueled by a steady, quiet drip of caffeine, adrenaline, and a bit of pharmaceutical reinforcement. Part 18, the sleep that never quite comes. Nighttime brings its own quiet challenge. How exactly does one sleep when the brain, chemically speaking, is still running full laps around the block? There's a peculiar irony to suburban life in this era. Everyone discusses housework endlessly, trades recipes freely, always claims to just need a little more energy. Yet nobody ever really talks about sleep, or the increasing lack of it. After a full day fueled by coffee, adrenaline, and government-sanctioned stimulants, the modern housewife faces her final, quietest battle of the day: simply getting any rest at all. The children are tucked in. The dishes are done. The dog has been walked one final time. Her husband is already softly snoring in the next room. By all rights, this should be peaceful. The house sits finally quiet, lit only by the pale glow of the street lamp outside and the low, comforting hum of the refrigerator. This is meant to be her moment of solitude. But her body, cheerfully medicated and thoroughly overcaffeinated, has entirely different plans. She slips into bed, arranging the pillows and smoothing the sheets as though sleep might somehow be coaxed into arriving through sheer symmetry. The clock reads well past 11. She tells herself firmly, early to bed. But her heart continues tapping out its own restless rhythm, and her thoughts are already racing several steps ahead into tomorrow's to-do list. Did she remember to thaw the chicken? Whose turn is it for the carpool this week? Where did that library book end up? Why is the dog still making that odd noise downstairs? Every minor worry becomes magnified in the darkness, projected onto the ceiling like a private late-night film reel. She closes her eyes. Sleep refuses to cooperate. Her mind, running now on what feels suspiciously like a second wind, replays the entire day at high speed. Laundry, groceries, the sales party, school forms, ironing, dinner, dishes, committee meeting, book club, and that quiet conversation with Louise about mother's little helper. She counts sheep, then to-do lists, then, somewhat despairingly, the number of nights in a row she's lain awake exactly like this. Around midnight, she tries every trick she knows: warm milk, which only makes her queasy, a lavender sachet, which sets off a sneezing fit, a magazine which only stirs fresh anxiety about her own living room curtains. Her husband rolls over, entirely oblivious. She wonders, not for the first time, how he manages to simply switch off like a lamp, while she flickers on and off all night like a temperamental string of holiday lights. By 1 in the morning, she begins quietly negotiating with herself. Perhaps she could just get up and fold a little laundry, polish some silver, write a quick thank you note. But she knows exactly how that particular slope goes: give in once, and suddenly she's vacuuming at 2 in the morning, and the neighbors start asking pointed questions the next day. Eventually, sometime past 2, her body simply gives out before her mind does. She drifts into something resembling sleep, not the peaceful, restorative kind, but a series of fitful naps punctuated by anxious dreams about missed appointments and runaway casseroles. When the alarm sounds at 6, she rises with the practiced efficiency of someone who has long since forgotten what feeling properly rested even resembles. The next day, if anyone asks, she'll simply smile and say, "Oh, I never sleep terribly well, too much on my mind, I suppose." Nobody blinks. Every woman on the block knows exactly what she means. Part 19. When the pills stop being enough. Sometimes, despite everything, the tablets simply stop working the way they used to. There are tears in the pantry, a small breakdown at the dinner table. Everyone around her seems perpetually on edge, yet nobody is quite permitted to actually be unhappy. And so, naturally, another prescription enters the picture. In this world, emotions are managed with roughly the same precision as the weekly laundry schedule. She is expected to remain upbeat, organized, and unfailingly cheerful at all times. Any visible crack in that veneer, an unwashed dish left too long, a heavy sigh, a single curl out of place, tends to be treated as evidence that something is seriously wrong. But feelings, much like household dust, have a way of quietly accumulating in the corners, and eventually no amount of stimulant can keep them fully contained. It starts quietly. Perhaps she cries in the pantry after burning dinner 2 nights running. Perhaps she loses her temper over a small spill of milk, then apologizes so many times her own child offers her a tissue, looking faintly alarmed. Or perhaps she simply stops for an hour or two, letting the laundry pile up, letting the telephone ring unanswered, sitting quietly at the kitchen table staring at a half-finished grocery list. The dread creeps in disguised as ordinary exhaustion. She tells herself she's simply tired, though tired doesn't quite explain the tight ache in her chest, or the persistent feeling of being slowly buried beneath her own endless to-do list. Her husband, sympathetic but genuinely baffled, offers well-meaning but unhelpful advice. "You just need to relax a bit, honey," he says, handing her a glass of water and a look of gentle, uncomprehending concern. He isn't unkind. He simply doesn't fully grasp it. His world is measured out in meetings and commutes and the comfortable clink of ice in an evening drink. Hers is measured in an endless, overlapping list of responsibilities that never quite has an off switch. Her struggles are gently waved away with suggestions to rest, take it easy, perhaps draw a nice bath. But rest proves elusive, and a bath mostly just means sitting quietly with her own worries for 20 uninterrupted minutes. Eventually, inevitably, the routine cracks entirely. Maybe there's a full breakdown at the dinner table over something as small as canned peas, or a sudden burst of frustration directed at the dog for barking at the mail carrier. The tears arrive, unstoppable and faintly embarrassing. The children stare, wide-eyed and silent. Her husband looks helpless, unsure what to do with his hands. Later, he'll gently suggest she's simply having a spell. The neighbors, if word gets around, will murmur something about nerves. The doctor will nod knowingly, scribble out yet another prescription, and send her home with something new, something meant to smooth out the rough edges, calm the racing thoughts, take the sharp sting out of the day. Now there are 2 bottles in the medicine cabinet. One for mornings to keep her moving. One for evenings, a mild sedative meant to quiet her mind when it refuses to slow down on its own. She feels numb rather than anxious now, slow rather than sharp. The house remains spotless, but her thoughts move like syrup. She quietly wonders which version of herself her husband actually prefers, the tireless whirlwind of productivity, or this gentler, hazier presence drifting through the evening hours. Nobody, of course, discusses genuine unhappiness openly. She's expected to feel grateful, to count her blessings, to remember precisely how fortunate she truly is. A little nervousness is socially acceptable. Real sadness is not. The breakdown gets quietly swept beneath the routine, explained away with a new bottle and some well-meaning advice from friends who are, in all likelihood, managing something remarkably similar behind their own closed doors. And yet, in the privacy of her own thoughts, she suspects she isn't alone in this. Every woman in her circle has surely had her own version of this exact moment, the pantry tears, the quiet car rides, the long afternoons when absolutely nothing seems to fit properly. She dries her eyes, straightens her shoulders, and gets back to work. Tomorrow brings a fresh set of expectations, another round of smiles to manage. Part 20. The glossy lie on the magazine rack. Standing in the checkout line at the grocery store, she's surrounded on all sides by rows of glossy promises. Every magazine cover features a smiling woman holding a cake, a vacuum cleaner, or a baby, sometimes, remarkably, all 3 at once, as though multitasking of this exact caliber was invented specifically for her. Her hair is flawless, her lipstick unsmudged. Her dress looks just as crisp at 6 in the evening as it presumably did at 6 that morning. She catches her own reflection briefly in the glass of the freezer case, one sock slightly askew beneath her stocking, hair gradually losing its careful shape by the hour, and a faint, slightly frantic shine in her own eyes, courtesy of that morning's stimulant. The magazines beckon anyway, promising easy answers. 10 ways to delight your husband. How to host the perfect luncheon. Secrets to a sparkling floor and sparkling eyes to match. She flips through the pages, half dreading and half genuinely hoping for some new solution. The advice always sounds deceptively simple. Try a new casserole recipe. Polish the silverware. Set the table with color-coordinated napkins. And if all else somehow fails, simply smile a little wider. There is notably no article addressing existential dread, marital exhaustion, or the surprisingly emotional crisis of choosing the correct drapery pattern. Every woman photographed inside is relentlessly cheerful, her home suspiciously tidy, her children quietly and obediently drawing at the kitchen table, her husband beaming as though he's just won a small lottery. Not a single wrinkle, not one visible spot on any window, not a trace of any emotion beyond pure, uncomplicated joy. And yet, if you look closely enough, there's something faintly frantic in every one of those smiles. A glint of performance that any genuine housewife could probably spot from 50 paces away. It isn't really about appearance at all in the end. It's about narrative, the persistent, comforting story that everything always remains fully under control, that any difficult emotion can be managed with a clever new hairstyle or a well-timed gelatin salad recipe. The world depicted in these pages is soft focus and untouched by genuine chaos, anxiety, or disappointment of any kind. She sometimes tries in her own small way to recreate that fantasy. She lines the children up for a photograph, arranges the living room just so, bakes something from scratch. But the children inevitably fidget. The sofa cushions sag slightly out of frame. The cake emerges looking more like an ambitious modern art sculpture than anything in the magazine. Still, she snaps the photo anyway, smiling just as widely as the women in the pages, because someday, she suspects, she'll want proof that she at least tried. The camera, of course, never captures the underlying panic, the quiet exhaustion, the frantic buzzing energy running just beneath the surface. Meanwhile, real life keeps intruding regardless. The laundry multiplies overnight, the groceries run low earlier than expected, and a neighbor casually mentions how her new drapes have brightened up her whole house. She smiles and nods, privately wondering whether that particular secret involves a different pharmacy or simply a different magazine subscription. Part 21. What the children quietly notice. For the average child growing up on this particular street, life mostly appears simple: school, backyard games, peanut butter sandwiches cut carefully into triangles. But there's always something a little curious, a little mysterious, about their mother's daily routines. Mornings begin with the rustle of curtains, the clatter of pans, the faint smell of bacon, or, occasionally, of slightly burnt toast. Through still blurry, half-asleep eyes, a child watches her move through the kitchen with the brisk, determined energy of a small, cheerful tornado. Breakfast appears on the table. Lunches get packed. And somehow, impossibly, she's already wearing lipstick before anyone has even located their missing socks. At first, it simply seems like magic. How does she manage so much before the school bus even arrives? A teacher might ask, one afternoon, what exactly a child's mother does all day. The answer, condensed into something a small child can articulate, usually comes out simply as she cleans, though that hardly captures the manic, cheerful ballet witnessed each and every morning. After school, returning home often means the faint clatter of a typewriter, or the low hum of the television, mother deep in the middle of some new project, a cake, a casserole, or reorganizing the hallway closet for what feels like the third time this month. Sometimes she's out in the backyard trimming hedges or scrubbing the patio for reasons that remain entirely mysterious, yet somehow deeply urgent. She moves from room to room, as though each one harbors its own small emergency, only she is equipped to solve. The children invent quiet games around her relentless energy. How many times will mom say, "Just a minute," before snack time actually arrives? Can anyone manage to sneak a cookie without her noticing? The answer is almost always no, unless she happens to be particularly absorbed in reorganizing the encyclopedia set by color that particular afternoon. At dinner, she remains the calm center of the storm, passing plates, pouring milk, settling minor disputes, reciting everyone's schedule for the coming week entirely from memory. Their father simply smiles contentedly over his plate of meatloaf, seemingly unaware of the sheer volume of coordination happening around him. The children exchange quiet, curious glances, silently wondering if other mothers on the street operate at quite this same speed. The real mystery, though, arrives after dark. Bedtime comes and goes, yet the house doesn't fully slow down. A child might hear drawers quietly opening down the hall, the faint hum of a vacuum, the unmistakable soft tapping of spice jars being sorted carefully into alphabetical order well past 10 at night. One evening, sneaking out for a glass of water, a child finds her calmly reorganizing the refrigerator entirely by color. She gives a sleepy, reassuring smile, tucks the child gently back into bed, and murmurs something about simply not being able to rest with the pickles sitting so close to the jam. The child accepts this explanation without a second thought, the way only a child truly can. Years later, looking back, that same child will likely understand what was actually happening behind the scenes. The small brown bottles quietly tucked into the medicine cabinet, the knowing winks and half-joking references to mom's little helper traded between adults. But for now, as a child in this particular decade, all that's really understood is that mother is something close to a marvel, endlessly energetic, endlessly capable, and somehow always able to help everyone find their missing socks by 7 in the morning. Part 22. Keeping pace with the Joneses. It's a bright Saturday morning, and she's sipping her coffee by the kitchen window, quietly surveying the front lawn. Across the street, Dorothy is already outside trimming her rose bushes with the intense focus of a neurosurgeon and the sheer speed of an over-caffeinated squirrel. Her lawn resembles a green carpet. Her driveway gleams. Her car practically looks ready for a magazine photo shoot. She glances at her own modest garden and sighs. A single stubborn dandelion waves back at her, practically daring her to do something about it. The suburban arms race, as always, is in full swing, and it isn't limited to rose bushes and freshly cut lawns. It extends to pies, window displays, bake sale ribbons, and who can host the most elaborate home sales party without visibly losing her mind in the process. Dorothy, somehow, seems to win at absolutely everything. Her pies rise tall and golden, crusts fluted to near architectural precision. Her curtains match her sofa, which in turn matches her wallpaper, which somehow also matches the color of her front door, an achievement that reads either as pure genius or a faint symptom of undiagnosed mania. Naturally, nobody admits out loud that this is a contest. Cheerful waves are exchanged, recipes swapped politely at the mailbox, compliments offered on each other's new hairstyles. But underneath the surface runs a relentless, entirely unspoken rivalry. If Dorothy repaints her shutters, she finds herself browsing paint swatches before breakfast the very next morning. If Dorothy throws a garden party, she's already mentally calculating exactly how many sandwiches and deviled eggs it would take to top it. Keeping pace requires stamina, sharp organization, and if she's being entirely honest with herself, a touch of chemical support. The tablets get quietly exchanged at the pharmacy counter and discussed, just as quietly, over hairdryers at the beauty salon. Everyone, it seems, is taking something. Nobody says so directly. Dorothy insists she's simply a natural early riser, but there's a particular wide, glassy quality to her smile that gives the game away entirely. Staying competitive means never quite letting her guard down. Every single morning brings some fresh challenge, a new patch of stubborn weeds, another committee meeting, another bake sale, another mysterious new flowering plant thriving suspiciously well in Dorothy's front bed. Her heart races as she loads another wash, plans yet another dinner, trims the hedges for the third time this week, and wonders, not entirely jokingly, whether Dorothy is currently watching from behind her spotless lace curtains. She usually is. The pressure remains constant, yet nobody ever quite cracks openly. Complain and you're accused of simple sour grapes. Slip up even slightly, and somebody is bound to notice and mention it gently at the next gathering. Appearances remain everything. She plasters on a smile, puts on her best dress, and waves cheerfully from the driveway, as though the entire street were one continuous stage production. The performance is exhausting, but quitting simply isn't presented as an option. Deep down, she suspects Dorothy feels precisely the same way. Perhaps her Saturday morning energy is just as borrowed, her own smile just as effortful, her pies the product of insomnia dressed up as ambition. But out here, in this particular neighborhood, nobody talks openly about the underlying strain, or the exhaustion, or the little bottles everybody insists they don't actually rely on. Part 23. The quiet sisterhood behind closed doors. Behind every one of these carefully closed front doors sits a woman quietly wondering whether she's the only one occasionally coming undone, fully dressed and fully composed on the surface. She isn't, of course. Underneath all the bright smiles and brisk driveway waves runs a quieter, humming truth threading through every pastel-colored block in the neighborhood. Everyone in their own way is performing. Nobody's entirely certain how convincingly. She senses it in the slightly awkward pauses between neighbors, in the too hearty laughter shared at committee meetings, in the faint tremor in Mrs. Alvarez's voice whenever she describes yet another impossibly busy week. It's visible in Ruth's slightly smudged lipstick, or in Louise's eyes appearing just a touch too bright during book club discussions. Everyone trades recipes freely, along with hairstyling tips and gardening advice. But nobody ever quite trades stories about the panic that occasionally strikes in the pantry, or the tears shed quietly over a burnt casserole. She keeps her own moments private, convinced that admitting to any of it might cause the entire careful performance to collapse at once. And yet, underneath the surface, there exists a genuine, if entirely unspoken, bond, a quiet sisterhood built from shared exhaustion, frayed nerves, and mutual, wordless relief. In the checkout line at the pharmacy, she'll occasionally catch another woman's eye for a brief moment, and in that instant, both of them simply know. They recognize the same weary gratitude toward their respective little helpers, the same quiet mental math calculating exactly how long this month's refill will last, the same faint, secret hope that the next prescription might bring something just slightly kinder. Nobody openly discusses the small bottles tucked behind the cold cream in every medicine cabinet on the street, but everyone has one, hidden, discreet, reliable as any household rumor. Just for my nerves, she'll say if anyone happens to ask. The fuller truth involves the sleepless nights, the mornings when the sheer weight of expected perfection feels like a brick tucked into her apron pocket. She prays quietly that her children don't notice, and that the neighbors don't gossip too loudly, though deep down she suspects she isn't nearly as skilled at hiding it as she'd like to believe. Every so often the careful facade cracks slightly, a faint sob muffled behind the bathroom door while dinner quietly burns on the stove, an unexpected outburst at the table that leaves everyone staring silently down at their plates. Afterward, she gathers herself, fixes her hair, hopes the light dusting of powder sufficiently hides her red-rimmed eyes. She isn't supposed to have genuinely bad days, not when, according to every magazine on the rack, happiness sits just one well-executed casserole away. So she keeps her private struggles to herself, polishes every visible surface, and continues the performance right alongside every other woman on the block. But there's a quiet beauty tucked somewhere inside all this careful hiding, despite everything. She's never entirely alone in it. An anonymous note occasionally appears tucked into her mailbox, simply reading "hang in there," with no signature attached. Someone brings over a plate of cookies for no particular reason at all. At the next committee meeting, Ruth quietly slips her a recipe card along with a small, knowing wink. Nobody ever says the word struggle out loud, but it hangs quietly in the air anyway, softer than a sigh, and every bit as sturdy as a strong cup of coffee. Part 24. When the stimulants run out, the tranquilizers move in. Eventually, inevitably, the stimulants stop delivering quite the same punch they once did, or she simply runs out of steam entirely before they do. And so, quietly, a new wave of pharmaceutical assistants arrives to take their place. Tranquilizers, the sleepy, gentler cousin of speed. Her day typically begins the same familiar way, a spark of nervous energy, a whirlwind of chores, a flurry of perfectly organized chaos. But somewhere around the third week, or perhaps the third refill, the sharp edges of that energy begin to blur slightly. The little white tablets simply don't deliver the same reliable punch they once did. Her hands tremble a bit more than usual. Her heart pounds louder. Her nerves, once taut as piano wire, begin to visibly fray at the edges. She starts noticing the inevitable crash more clearly now: headaches, sudden irritability, a creeping dread that there's simply nothing left in the medicine cabinet capable of helping her sweep up the day's invisible mess. Her doctor notices as well. At first, he offers gentle reassurance. Everyone feels a bit overwhelmed occasionally, he says kindly. Then comes a different sort of prescription entirely, softer, pastel-colored, promising calm rather than energy. The advertisements for these particular tablets like to call them a small vacation in a bottle. Her physician calls it medical progress. She more simply just calls it relief. The transition happens slowly, almost imperceptibly. At first, she takes just one at night, purely to help her relax before bed. Soon, though, she finds herself reaching for one at lunchtime too, and again in the late afternoon whenever the day feels a touch too sharp around the edges. These tranquilizers don't deliver the same buzzing rush as before, But that, it turns out, is entirely the point. No more jittery afternoons spent scrubbing bathroom grout with a toothbrush or alphabetizing canned goods well past midnight. Now, instead, she drifts a little. The underlying panic softens considerably. The constant background hum of anxiety fades gradually into something closer to gentle static. She notices the shift within herself fairly quickly. She moves a little slower now. She cares just a touch less about perfectly matching napkins or achieving the shiniest silverware on the block. The dog can bark through an entire afternoon and she barely flinches anymore. She lingers longer at the kitchen table, stirring her coffee, quietly watching the steam rise in slow, lazy curls. Her husband notices the change too. "You seem calmer these days," he remarks, almost as though commenting casually on the weather. She simply nods and smiles, careful not to mention that sometimes she feels almost too calm, as though drifting gently through a dream she can't quite manage to wake herself up from. The neighborhood adjusts right alongside her. Dorothy's roses remain redder than everyone else's, but somehow it bothers her considerably less these days. Book club conversations drift gradually away from recipes and curtain patterns, replaced instead by gentle, knowing jokes about evening vitamins and mother's little helper. Nobody uses the word dependency. Why would they? These tablets are modern, scientific, thoroughly approved by both physicians and neighbors alike. Not an admission of any personal defeat, simply another practical tool in the ever-expanding suburban survival kit. Still, there are quiet moments when a certain emptiness creeps in unexpectedly. The laughter at committee meetings starts to feel a little hollow. The magazine covers strike her as slightly more absurd than they used to. She thinks back, occasionally, to those earlier days of powering straight through with nothing but a smile and a stimulant, that restless energy that once let her conquer an entire kitchen's worth of chores in a single afternoon. Now everything feels softer, quieter, more manageable, and somehow, at the same time, a little less real. Still, she keeps going. She takes the tablets. She hosts the bake sales. She smiles gently through the fatigue. If the stimulants were about doing absolutely everything, the tranquilizers seem to be about simply not minding quite so much when everything inevitably starts falling slightly apart around the edges. It's a trade-off, and one that very nearly every housewife on this particular street eventually finds herself making, sooner or later in one form or another. Part 25. Looking back at the pastel haze. Decades later, this pastel-toned era looks considerably less like a golden age and considerably more like a cautionary tale about pressure, about unattainable perfection, and about a pharmaceutical solution offered up for problems that, at the time, nobody was quite permitted to name out loud. At the time, of course, everything appeared wonderfully promising. Fresh new suburban developments stretched across the country like blank sheets of notebook paper, orderly, bright, refreshingly untouched by the general messiness of city life. Modern kitchen appliances filled every home, chrome and enamel gleaming, each one promising to finally liberate women from the drudgery of housework. Television jingles sang cheerfully about the good life. Magazines overflowed with smiling families and cakes that apparently never once collapsed. Looking at the surviving photographs today, you might genuinely believe everyone was living some sort of collective dream. But behind nearly every carefully staged, smiling portrait sits a fuller story rarely captured on film: the underlying exhaustion, the whispered anxieties, the restless, humming energy quietly pulsing beneath even the tidiest of homes. There was always one more room to clean, one more child to wrangle, one more roast at risk of burning. Every small detail mattered, and every single day presented a fresh opportunity to fall visibly short of the mark. When the pressure inevitably became too much to manage on willpower alone, there was reliably a pill waiting to help smooth things over, a small energizing boost each morning, a calming dose each evening, and seemingly a prescription available for every problem lodged somewhere in between. Women swapped quiet stories at the pharmacy counter and traded secrets discreetly in the checkout line. Some wore their nervous, buzzing energy almost like a badge of quiet honor. Others hid their genuine struggles carefully behind perfectly applied lipstick and practiced, easy laughter. Nobody at the time discussed the real cost involved, not simply the price tag attached to another refill, but the deeper toll extracted by maintaining the performance day after day. The endless juggling, the persistent insomnia, the sudden crashes, the quiet private shame that inevitably accompanied every stumble, alongside the fragile hope that the right combination of medication and sheer willpower might eventually make everything easier. Looking back now, with considerably more distance, the cracks running through that carefully polished era are far easier to spot. The relentless pursuit of a perfect home, a perfect marriage, a picture-perfect family fueled by science, by relentless advertising, and by an urgent, unspoken need to simply keep pace with everyone else on the block, was never genuinely sustainable. The stimulants that promised boundless energy quietly delivered insomnia and anxiety in return. The tranquilizers that promised calm brought along their own dull undertow of apathy and quiet detachment. The cost, in every case, was always there, simply hidden a little further beneath the surface. And yet, for all its excess and absurdity, there's something genuinely remarkable buried in how these women managed to cope. They found real camaraderie in whispered confessions and knowing glances exchanged at the pharmacy counter. They somehow managed to build genuine communities, raise their families, bake the pies, host the parties, and maintain a show of relentless optimism throughout it all. Beneath the starched aprons and carefully practiced smiles, they quietly supported one another, not always openly, but through 100 small, unremarkable acts of kindness, and through the quiet comfort of simply knowing they weren't entirely alone in any of it. Time has softened many of the sharper edges of that particular era. The houses have aged considerably. The lawns have grown a little patchier. The old magazines now sit faded on the shelves of second-hand shops, but the underlying lessons remain fully intact. Perfection is, and always has been, a moving target, and sometimes the true cost of chasing it runs considerably higher than it initially appears. The suburban dream was sold as an uncomplicated promise of happiness. But real happiness, messy, unpredictable, endlessly unfinished, has never quite fit neatly inside a plastic storage container. Looking back, the women of this era did precisely what they felt they had to do. They made do. They made it work. They quietly made history, one exhausting day and one small tablet at a time. And perhaps in the end, the hidden cost of chasing perfection wasn't really evidence of some private weakness at all, but rather proof of a very particular, very stubborn kind of strength. Part 26. The Church of Modern Appliances. The salesmen of this era love to promise that their new gadgets will save your soul, or, at the very least, your hands. The housewife's actual daily prayer, though, tends to be considerably simpler. Please, just let the washing machine make it through one full spin cycle without threatening to walk itself across the kitchen floor. Step into any mid-century kitchen, and you'll find every surface gleaming with chrome, every appliance promising an abundance of newly freed time. The icebox has a dedicated compartment just for gelatin desserts. The toaster proudly features 2 full slots. The blender advertises enough raw power to pulverize practically anything placed inside it, carrots included. The true centerpiece, though, remains the washer and dryer combination, a hulking metal beast humming away in the background like some kind of mechanical hymn. Every homemaker is promised, repeatedly, a genuine modern miracle. Magazine advertisements insist that a new automatic washing machine will finally set her free. What the enthusiastic salesman conveniently fails to mention is the hidden cost involved, both literal and otherwise. The monthly payments stretch on nearly as endlessly as the laundry pile itself, and she now spends entire afternoons deciphering an instruction manual that appears to have been translated by someone with only a passing familiarity with the English language. She dons her sturdiest housecoat, and approaches the washing machine the way one might approach an altar. The machine is already grumbling faintly, shaking the entire kitchen floor during its spin cycle and threatening, quite convincingly, to break free of its earthly restraints entirely. She sorts the laundry with the solemnity of a priest preparing for Mass, carefully separating whites from colors from an unidentifiable pile of mystery stains. Soap goes in, accompanied by a small silent prayer that the suds won't overflow onto the floor, followed immediately by another lap chasing the dog out of the room. The spin cycle begins, and she braces herself accordingly. If the machine starts shimmying dangerously across the linoleum, she simply wedges a folded towel beneath its legs, one of the many small domestic rituals never once mentioned in any home economics manual. Meanwhile, the new vacuum cleaner promises effortless cleaning, but weighs roughly as much as a small icebox and comes attached to a hose that seems to possess a genuine mind of its own. She recalls, with some lingering trauma, the afternoon it very nearly inhaled her favorite apron along with half the living room curtains. Despite the promise of newfound freedom, the more gadgets that arrive in her kitchen, the more work seems to somehow generate itself around them. It's no longer sufficient for clothing to simply be clean. Now it must be spotless, pleasantly scented, and pressed within an inch of its life. Floors are never quite clean enough. Dishes never gleam brightly enough. And the neighbors, naturally, are already comparing their own latest appliance purchases like small household trophies. Dorothy just acquired a stand mixer. She pretends not to care in the slightest, while secretly flipping through the appliance catalog later that same evening. Still, there are genuine moments of quiet gratitude scattered throughout the chaos. When the dryer doesn't spark, when the icebox actually produces proper ice, when the blender manages to turn fresh fruit into something resembling an actual milkshake rather than a minor kitchen catastrophe. By the end of the day, the appliances hum and rattle away together like some kind of mechanical choir, singing the ongoing praises of modern convenience. She wipes her brow, pours herself a glass of instant lemonade, and briefly considers lighting a candle in gratitude, or, at minimum, unplugging the toaster, just to be entirely safe. Part 27. A volcano built on nervous energy. The school sends home a note on Friday afternoon. Her child needs to construct a working model volcano by Monday morning. Fortunately, she happens to have access to more household chemicals than most modern laboratories, along with enough nervous energy currently coursing through her system to power a reasonably sized municipality. The note appears crumpled at the very bottom of a backpack, addressed cheerfully to dear parents, which translates in practice to you will be constructing this entire project while your child offers occasional suggestions and periodically glues their own fingers together. This isn't her first experience with a school science project. Last year brought an entire papier-mâché solar system, built using styrofoam balls and enough loose glitter to temporarily blind the family cat. This year, it's the volcano. She reads through the provided instructions and assembles her materials accordingly: baking soda, white vinegar, red food coloring, strips of newspaper flour paste, and critically, an absolutely relentless, chemically enhanced enthusiasm for the task ahead. Within minutes, the kitchen transforms into something resembling a small laboratory experiencing a minor structural collapse. Flour dust hangs in the air. Strips of newspaper litter every countertop. Every mixing bowl in the house has been conscripted into service in the name of elementary science. Her son's assigned job is to hold the base steady, a task he accomplishes primarily by knocking over the box of baking soda not once but twice. With steady hands and a noticeably elevated pulse, she molds the papier-mâché volcano, smoothing out lumps, patching small craters, and doing her level best not to audibly panic when the family dog attempts to sample the structure directly. Her mind, meanwhile, races considerably faster than the mixing spoon in her hand, running through every conceivable disaster scenario. Will it actually stand upright on the presentation table? Will the eruption actually work on command? Will she ever fully remove the flour paste currently drying in the living room curtains? The kitchen timer ticks steadily onward, and she realizes she's already overdue for her next small pharmaceutical boost. One tablet later, and she's running on pure, undiluted suburban housewife fuel, fully prepared to see this volcano through to completion. Her son contributes his own creative input throughout the process. Can it shoot actual fire? What if they added glitter to the eruption mixture? Could they possibly make it smell vaguely like dinosaurs? She promises nothing specific, beyond a genuinely memorable eruption come Monday morning. The evening blurs steadily into an extended stretch of construction and mild chaos. By well past midnight, the volcano stands complete, painted a convincing shade of brown with ominous streaks of red, complete with a hidden internal chamber for the grand finale. She tidies the kitchen at something approaching superhuman speed, only occasionally wondering whether any other family's volcano project comes complete with its own detailed architectural blueprints and backup eruption mechanism. The real test arrives Monday morning, as she carefully transports the fragile creation to school, balanced across the back seat of the car, her son humming with barely contained anticipation the entire drive. Inside the gymnasium, she quietly sizes up the competition: Barbara's baking soda geyser, Tommy's small windmill powered by what appears to be his father's electric drill, and one suspiciously professional-looking solar system that bears an uncanny resemblance to something purchased directly from a planetarium gift shop. When her son's turn finally arrives, the gymnasium falls momentarily quiet. She sets the volcano carefully on the presentation table, pours in the vinegar, and there it is, a genuinely glorious foaming eruption, tinted just enough with red food coloring to properly impress a room full of 8-year-olds. The other parents applaud politely. The teacher beams with approval. And she silently thanks modern science, her morning tablet, and her own thoroughly overdeveloped sense of parental duty in roughly equal measure. Part 28. The party line never really rests. The telephone rings again. It might be a neighbor. It might be her mother. It might, quite possibly, be a traveling salesman attempting to sell yet another line of vitamins. Social connection here is essential, but it also functions as its own kind of marathon for an already thoroughly caffeinated brain. Multitasking, frankly, was practically invented in kitchens exactly like hers. She's simultaneously basting a roasting chicken, organizing next week's charity raffle, and fielding an incoming call, all comfortably before her second tablet of the day has even fully kicked in. The shared party telephone line, a peculiar relic of suburban communication, means she is genuinely never entirely alone, even in the rare moments she might actually want to be. Pick up the receiver at the wrong moment, and she might overhear Mrs. Alvarez updating her sister at length about a stubborn corn on her foot, or Ruth reciting an exhaustive inventory of everything she's misplaced since breakfast. Privacy, as a general concept, seems reserved almost entirely for some future century. She's learned over time to whisper appropriately, to eavesdrop selectively, and to distinguish the telltale click of a curious neighbor listening in from the gentler static of an honest, ordinary conversation. Telephones here aren't merely reserved for emergencies. They function as the genuine lifeline of the entire social order. The kitchen phone, its coiled cord stretched impossibly into every corner of the room, serves as her personal headquarters for friendship, minor crisis management, and general neighborhood intelligence gathering. The ringing seems constant throughout the day. It's Margaret wanting her potato salad recipe. It's Dorothy recruiting volunteers for the spring school play. Occasionally it's her own mother, launching into an extended monologue about the finer points of home canning, her voice only trailing off once she senses her daughter has grown sufficiently distracted to agree to a visit sometime next month. These calls aren't purely social. Either they double as the neighborhood's informal news and intelligence network. Did you hear Mrs. Henderson finally replaced her kitchen curtains? Is Ruth's boy genuinely struggling in arithmetic this term? Has anyone actually seen the milkman since Tuesday? Updates fly back and forth faster than a plastic lid snapping shut at a home sales party. She keeps one ear firmly on the receiver and one eye on the back door, just in case the conversation happens to shift unexpectedly toward her. All the while, her hands stay busy regardless, folding laundry, flipping pork chops, scrawling reminders across the backs of old envelopes. She cradles the receiver against her shoulder while simultaneously breaking up a minor sibling dispute using nothing but pointed hand gestures and a well-practiced stern glance. It's an intricate ballet of constant busywork, performed entirely with the nervous, practiced grace of a woman running on her own particular blend of household rocket fuel. And then, naturally, there's the gossip itself, an essential nutrient of suburban existence. Everyone claims not to participate, and yet everyone is somehow perpetually in on it. The party line functions as a steady river of rumor, always flowing gently along, occasionally flooding its banks entirely. She listens, occasionally contributes, and now and then genuinely gasps at the latest neighborhood scandal. No, Louise's new poodle apparently isn't actually a rescue. Yes, Margaret really did faint at the last church bake sale, though only after discovering she'd accidentally sold store-bought cookies passed off as homemade. Eventually, the ringing subsides for a while, and she hangs up the receiver, mind still gently buzzing, roast chicken only slightly overdone. There's a strange, undeniable comfort tucked somewhere inside all that daily chaos, a rhythm to the constant interruptions. The party line may never fully rest, but amid the endless lists, casseroles, and general commotion, at least she knows someone, somewhere down the line, is always listening. Part 29. The impossible art of looking effortlessly put together. Nobody ever quite warns you that looking perfectly polished at all times is its own peculiar Olympic event. Stockings run at the worst possible moments. Crinoline petticoats itch relentlessly. And somewhere, quite possibly, a neighbor is silently judging the precise shade of her lipstick. Underneath all that careful elegance lies one persistent, faintly existential question. Exactly how does one properly accessorize chronic exhaustion? Step into her closet for a moment. A pastel-colored battleground lined with crinolines, freshly pressed dresses, and more pairs of sensible pumps than any one woman could realistically wear through in a lifetime. The unspoken law of the land here is effortless elegance. Never mind that achieving it actually requires an almost military level of coordination and enough bobby pins to reconstruct a small suspension bridge. Every morning begins with an outfit plan that reads more like a small campaign strategy. Press the dress, coordinate the shoes, select precisely the right strand of pearls. Hope quietly that the girdle underneath doesn't stage any kind of open rebellion before lunchtime. Fashion, in theory, exists to express individual personality. In practice, on this particular street, it mostly exists to reassure everyone watching that she is not, in fact, quietly coming apart at the seams. Her outfit functions as a kind of armor. Hair sprayed into complete immobility. Lipstick chosen in a shade that signals both warm approachability and a certain quiet authority. Gloves for every single outing, and a proper hat if she's hopping to score a few extra points with the neighbor who happens to own a pair of binoculars. The only thing more socially dangerous than a visibly wrinkled skirt is a visibly wrinkled reputation. Plaid patterns seem to be everywhere this season: skirts, curtains, aprons, even the good tablecloth. Wearing precisely the right plaid signals fashionable good taste. Wearing the wrong one, unfortunately, generates exactly the kind of minor scandal that circulates quickly along the party telephone line. Prints occasionally clash rather badly, but she wears the combination anyway, too distracted by the urgent need to get out the door before her children manage to redecorate her outfit with a fresh handful of grape jelly. Petticoats swish and scratch constantly underneath, a persistent physical reminder that elegance in this particular decade is often nearly indistinguishable from mild ongoing discomfort. Then there are the shoes, sensible in theory yet stylish. By dinner time her feet genuinely ache in ways no home sales party could ever cure. Pumps for shopping errands, loafers for cleaning, heels for committee meetings. Each pair carefully selected to project precisely the right message. though the only individual who seems genuinely impressed happens to be the family dog, currently equipped with 3 brand new chew toys. And then, naturally, there are the stockings, snagging reliably on kitchen chairs, running at the most inconvenient possible moments and perpetually, mysteriously in short supply. Hair receives its own nightly production, set carefully into rollers, then sprayed and pinned each morning until it forms something close to a protective helmet, sturdy enough to withstand a light breeze or an unannounced visit from a disapproving mother-in-law. Hats perch precariously atop it all, threatening to fly off entirely at the first sign of genuine emotion. And through all of it, she smiles, nods pleasantly, and pretends everything comes as effortlessly as the women pictured in the magazine seem to suggest it should. Beneath all the layers of fabric, powder, and sheer effort, there lingers a quiet longing for genuine comfort, for one single day when getting dressed simply means pajamas and a pair of soft slippers. She daydreams occasionally about elastic waistbands, bare feet, and hair allowed to move freely in the breeze. But for now, she presses onward. The costume, after all, must remain perfect. The illusion must hold. The neighborhood must continue believing she has it all entirely together, right down to the perfectly matched handbag hash part 30. An exercise routine measured in nervous energy. Every magazine on the rack recommends a trim, athletic figure. There's a twist, though. Her actual exercise routine consists rather less of jumping jacks and rather more of trembling with nervous energy while rearranging the linen closet for the 6th time this week. Somewhere between the appetite suppressants, the deliberately modest dinners, and a genuine fear of swimsuit season looming on the horizon, the closest thing to an actual workout most days is simply trying to keep pace with her own racing heartbeat. Health, in this particular decade, revolves almost entirely around appearance rather than genuine well-being. The magazines are filled with pastel-clad women stretching gracefully in immaculate living rooms, smiling as they promise to trim their waistlines in a mere 5 minutes daily. She flips through page after page of increasingly absurd contraptions, vibrating exercise belts, spring-loaded thigh machines, something called a reducing roller that looks suspiciously more like a torture device intended for bread dough than any legitimate fitness equipment. Each new monthly issue promises a fresh secret shortcut toward a swimsuit-ready figure. Eat more grapefruit. Avoid potatoes entirely. Perform sit-ups before sunrise. The specific advice shifts constantly, though the underlying message remains remarkably consistent. Thin is fashionable, and genuine effort is somehow always optional. She does make an honest attempt. She rolls out a rubber exercise mat that smells faintly of quiet desperation and attempts a modest set of calisthenics. The radio offers cheerful encouragement in the background, though mostly she ends up sprawled across the floor, counting ceiling tiles and quietly plotting her next available snack, celery, if she's being properly virtuous, or a small biscuit if she's decided today calls for a bit of gentle cheating. After roughly 10 minutes of stretching, she decides she's earned a brief rest, and perhaps another cup of coffee. Who, after all, genuinely needs a proper gymnasium when there's an entire household to run single-handedly? Every single day amounts to its own accidental workout regimen, hauling laundry baskets up and down the stairs, scrubbing floors on her hands and knees, carrying groceries in from the car, chasing after children who move with roughly the speed and cunning of small woodland creatures. She climbs the staircase so many times throughout the day that her calves, by rights, ought to look sculpted from marble. No genuine health kick, naturally, would be complete without diligent calorie counting. She keeps a small notebook tucked into her apron pocket, jotting down every bite and sip as though the simple act of writing it all down might somehow make the calories disappear entirely. A modest salad for lunch, half a grapefruit as a mid-afternoon snack, a sliver of pie for dessert, eaten with visible restraint. At dinner, she serves her husband generous, heaping portions, then quietly nibbles at a single forkful of her own, insisting she simply isn't especially hungry tonight, all while her stomach audibly protests loudly enough to startle the family cat. When hunger genuinely threatens her resolve, chemistry conveniently steps in to help. Those familiar little tablets from the doctor's office curb her appetite effectively and send her zipping cheerfully through her chores with the boundless energy of a caffeinated gazelle. Who, really, needs proper food when synthetic willpower is readily available at the local pharmacy? She loses a pound here, gains a small compliment at the next committee meeting, and quietly curses the swimsuit currently hidden at the very back of her closet. There's always some new fad circulating, some fresh promise, some new miracle product. Wheat germ, fresh carrot juice, oversized vitamin tablets roughly the size of marbles. Each one arrives more optimistic than the product it quietly replaced. But deep down, if she's entirely honest with herself, she suspects nobody on this particular street is genuinely exercising in any meaningful sense. Nobody feels truly satisfied. Everybody, in their own quiet way, is simply trying to keep pace with everyone else. At the end of the day, she collapses into bed, heart still racing faintly, mind still quietly counting calories, hoping that tomorrow might bring her just a little closer to slimmer, or at minimum, a bit more forgiving of herself. A quiet thank you, and so, as another long day winds gently down in the spotless, pastel-lit trenches of 1950s suburbia, she finally settles onto the edge of her carefully made twin bed, hair still perfectly set, eyes wide open, mind still running its own private marathon that would leave even a professional athletic coach visibly impressed. She has cooked, cleaned, ironed, hosted, driven, smiled, and organized enough today to fill 3 ordinary lifetimes. All of it powered by a quiet chemical boost that nobody particularly wanted to discuss out loud, even while nearly everyone around her was relying on precisely the same thing. Let's take a genuine moment here to honor the caffeine and stimulant-fueled resilience of these mid-century housewives. They endured considerably more than the occasional burnt casserole or overly curious neighbor. They endured the truly impossible expectations of an entire era demanding they remain perfect, energetic, endlessly composed, and effortlessly beautiful, all well before 5 o'clock arrived each evening. They held entire families, neighborhoods, and school committees together through sheer force of will, a healthy dose of genuine grace, and yes, the occasional pharmaceutical assist. Tonight, settled into an entirely different kind of bed, one equipped with proper climate control, genuine memory foam, and the simple modern freedom to occasionally say no to hosting yet another bake sale. It feels worth pausing to offer a quiet word of thanks. Thanks to the women who endured an entire decade insisting perfection was mandatory and exhaustion strictly forbidden, held upright largely by a small white tablet and an enormous reserve of stubborn determination. Because history, at the end of the day, isn't merely a parade of dates and dry facts. It's the accumulated sum of millions of quietly heroic, occasionally quite absurd ordinary days. It's a gentle reminder that whatever struggles we happen to carry today, at the very least, most of us aren't expected to vacuum in pearls or attempt to outrun our own existential dread armed with nothing but a casserole dish and a bottle of amphetamines. So go ahead, take a slow breath, and let yourself drift off tonight. The past may have been genuinely absurd in places, but somehow, every single day, those women made it through. And tomorrow, thankfully, there's no gelatin salad waiting at dawn. Good night, and I'll see you next time.